Hey y'all, hi. It's time for another episode of New Makeup Hot Takes, but extenuating circumstances today. We do not know how long we're going to have to edit this one. These days, it's Joe who handles the editing for New Makeup Hot Takes. He doesn't do all the editing on the channel, by the way, since we're discussing it. Sometimes I will edit like an entire video and then everyone in the comments will be like, wow, Joe really slayed the editing. And I'm like, the fashion videos, for example, that is literally all me. But Joe does a lot. I'm not trying to say he doesn't do a lot. It's just that we share it. We share the burden of editing. And he has become the New Makeup Hot Takes editor. And as you'll know, if you watch this series, he really does the most. He really goes to town. He's really amazing at it. And he puts a lot of time into it. This has become a video that's kind of a big project every time it rolls around. A big project for him, a big project on our calendar, and we always make sure there's enough time and space set aside to get it done in the way that it usually gets done. Right now, we don't know if we're going to have that time for this one. Anyway, I didn't want to not film New Makeup Hot Takes because we don't know how much time we're going to have to edit it. So the solution that we came up with is this. I've narrowed it down to like the tippy top products of interest, which isn't that different from what I often do. It's pretty extreme in this case. It's going to be like deep dives into a handful of products that are new to the market. And the editing might be a little bit less, how shall we say, elaborate than it usually is, depending. But in spite of all of that, I'm going to try to give you a makeup theory rich video. I will try still to deliver the meatiness for which I am known. I'll try to look alive. I'll try to look a little more alive than I looked in that refi video. If you happen to be new around here, I will tell you, my name is Hannah. I love talking about trends and aesthetics, and I love talking about what's new to the market in makeup. But I try not to promote overspending on my channel. In these videos, I like to unpack the impulses of desire to buy new stuff. I try to stay really grounded. I hope you'll consider subscribing if you're just checking me out and you end up liking this one. And now let us go ahead and get into the meat of the video. New makeup, hot takes. New makeup, hot takes. Okay, first on the docket, I want to talk about the difference in my reactions to two eyeshadow palettes, like the two eyeshadow palettes that have been announced since I last filmed one of these, both of which I think kind of have the same maybe issue or are sauntering out onto the scene with sort of the same character as each other with relation to the brands that are releasing them. But I have had a wildly different reaction to each one of them, and I want to unpack that a little bit. So the two palettes are the new Pat McGrath Mothership palette, Sunlit Seduction, which actually got announced right after I filmed the last New Makeup Hot Take. So this isn't exactly hot off the presses, but I haven't had a chance to talk about it on camera yet. I did pin a comment in my last New Makeup Hot Takes, and in that comment I said, really the only thing there is to say about this, which is, it seems like an April Fool's joke. It seems like an AI designed palette. It seems like a robot designed a Pat McGrath palette based on all of the other Pat McGrath palettes that exist. Like the lowest common denominator with no creativity or originality, but to the point of hilarity, like to the point of disbelief. What I'm trying to say is that it looks so much like something that's already been released. And we've been saying this for years, by Pat McGrath. We've been saying this for years about Pat McGrath, but I feel like every time everyone said, oh no, another rose palette, another pink palette. And I've always been able to sort of reserve a little bit of understanding for why it might be this way. I've always been like, yeah, but I could kind of see how this is slightly balanced a little bit more towards this undertone or that, or it includes this, whereas these other palettes didn't. It seems to be offering something subtly different than the others, even though the color scheme is still pink overall. Like there's always been something to hold on to, a little bit of benefit of the doubt that we can give. And you know, I love Pat McGrath. I love the vision. I love the formulas. I love the Pat McGrath palettes that I own. I want to love what she does. I want to want her makeup. She's the queen. But there is just nothing to be said about that. Like there's nothing to hold on to. There's no explanation inherent to the aesthetics of the palette. I think that there might be a market value explanation. There might be like a market research explanation, and I'll get into that in a second. But just looking at it as a makeup consumer, as a makeup analyst, as a makeup lover, as a beauty YouTuber, here as a person who consumes beauty content on the internet, looking at it as a member of our community, I literally would believe that it is an April Fool's joke. It is one step away from that mock-up of the Morphe palette where all of the shades are the same shade of brown that I think was an April Fool's joke or was something that the beauty news girls did at some point like that. This is literally one step away from that. So that is the first palette that I am discussing in this little moment, this part of the video. And I want to juxtapose that palette and my reactions to it to this brand new announcement, I think. Yeah, I mean, as I'm sitting here, it's like an hour ago. I'm sitting here and it was posted on Trend Mood an hour ago. The I Need a Nude palette from Natasha Denona. I saw this and I about fell out of my chair. I was like, how soon can I buy this with my own $67? I was like, oh, $69. With my own roughly $70, I was like, I mean, and this is not me. I don't know if I've ever said take my money before about makeup, like in a comment on camera. No, I do know. I'm not a take my money type of person. Out here, I'm not a take my money type of consumer. And you know, my life's about to change dramatically. I don't foresee myself buying eyeshadow palettes over the next couple of months. So I am talking about the feelings, you know what I mean? Not necessarily the actual act that I will take or the actual destiny. And I am a Natasha Denona affiliate. Maybe they'll send this out in PR. It's kind of a new development, like being an affiliate. So I don't really know how they handle these things, but I saw this and I was like, take my money. I want it. And here's the thing. When I became a Natasha Denona affiliate, they sent me some makeup and I chose a palette and I chose the Glam palette, which is the palette that this most resembles that's in her line already. There is an argument that at first glance, especially, that this looks very similar to the Glam palette and is sort of a repeat of what she's already done, especially if you look at the Biba. Although I think Biba's a different story because it doesn't have any metallics in it. It's an all matte palette. It's just, there's a strong argument that's similar to the reaction to the Pat McGrath palette. There's a strong argument that this is just kind of a remix of what she's already done. And I'm sure I'm not reading the comments on Trend Mood because literally nothing makes me more depressed about humanity. Like I cannot handle the comments on Trend Mood. So much negativity. But I bet if I were to scroll down and read the comments on this, it would be like, yawn, how predictable, not again. Didn't she already release this? You know what I mean? Like I bet that that's what people are saying. But I feel like this was designed for me. It's cool toned, but not too cool toned. It's cool toned without leaning blue, which is my holy grail. It's got all of these mucky, dark, bronzy taupes. They're like bronzes, but they're bronzy taupes. A touch of warmth, but it's like a rosy warmth. A very, very dark, raisiny brown, some mid-toned matte taupes that look like they might actually be taupe and not orange. And so many of what look like sheer sparkly top coats. Like three sheer sparkly top coats. It's like Natasha Denona watched my channel and watched everything I've ever said about her in any of her palettes and designed this palette specifically for me. And it doesn't hurt that I've been using the Glam palette since it arrived, kind of defaulting to it for the most part, really enjoying using it. And this just seems like an upgrade even to it. Like it seems like a more Hannah version of the Glam palette, even though I've been loving the Glam palette so much. The question is though, why am I so excited about this remix, this Natasha Denona remix, and so incredulous about Pat McGrath having basically done the exact same thing? Even though all things being equal, I prefer Pat McGrath as a brand and I prefer Pat McGrath eyeshadows. Like I wish that Pat McGrath had done something like this. Like I want the Pat McGrath version of the I Need a Nude eyeshadow palette from Natasha Denona, and I would much rather buy that. One obvious answer is that these are my colors, right? I really love taupes, cool-toned eyeshadows that aren't too blue or that aren't blue at all, grungy bronzes, and I don't really want a pink eyeshadow palette, never have, never will. Like that's the very obvious answer. But the thing that it sheds light on to me is why Pat maybe keeps doing the same thing over and over, because what I've basically said to you is this is the same thing over and over with a slight tweak from Natasha Denona, and yet I'm like beating down the door to buy it, even though I already own something very similar to it. The thing that is the most similar to it that she's ever released. I would happily buy this as well because it just feels so me and so right. And I don't usually feel this way about new releases and about eyeshadow palettes, right? It takes a lot for something to hit the ball out of the park so much that I'm sort of drooling. I'm like drooling over it. I usually hold onto my hat, you know? But it's because the colors are so mine and she does it so well and she's doing it so well. It's such a luxury brand and it's like the pinnacle. It just feels like a slightly reworked version of the pinnacle of the kind of thing that I like. So what I'm trying to get at is that I bet that there are a lot of people out there for whom this is the case, but with pink eyeshadow, like with the rose tones of the Pat McGrath canon. Ouvre. I just bet that there are people who feel the way about rose and about Pat McGrath shadows, the way that I feel about taupe and about Pat McGrath and Natasha Denona shadows. And they have seen this new release from Pat McGrath and they're like, well, it's only a little bit different from the other palette or the other couple of palettes that I have from her, but it's different enough. And I love rose and pink and I'm sensitive to the differences and it's different enough and I love this kind of thing enough and I wear this kind of thing enough and I'm sort of a collector of this kind of thing enough that I want to buy it even though it could be an April Fool's joke. And maybe I'm just not able to see the opening for that in the world of Pat McGrath because a palette with this color scheme is the last thing I want. Whereas I'm able to see it for Natasha Denona because a palette with this color scheme is the first thing that I want. It's the only thing that I want. And I don't have time for any of these people who are like, oh, yawn, she's done this before, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, she's done something almost like this before, but this is even more exquisite than that. This is an upgrade on that. This is absolutely perfect. So leave me alone. Like that's how I feel about I Need a Nude. And it makes room for me to be able to continue to give Pat McGrath the benefit of the doubt in the face of the incredulity that I felt when that palette was first released. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk about eyeshadows on the market. Let's move on. I don't know how much I'm going to actually be able to say, like how much of a deep dive I'm actually going to be able to give on the Urban Decay Naked Metal Mania palette, but I just had to include it in the elite group of things that are being talked about in this video because I have questions. I have questions and I have statements. It's yet another conundrum to which I think the answer is probably market research on the back end that we don't know anything about, which is to say probably the reason that Urban Decay keeps releasing palettes and calling them naked, even though they're like the furthest thing from naked conceptually, is that the naked line sells. It must be that on the back end, the numbers for eyeshadow palette purchases are like through the roof for anything called naked compared to the numbers for eyeshadow palette purchases that depart from the naked line. It must be that that's the case because otherwise, why would they keep beating this horse and why would they keep trying to force it with concepts that don't make sense as naked? And I am aware that usually the formula has a kind of nudity to it. Like when a palette is a naked palette, it usually these days from my experience means that the formula is kind of watery, doesn't pack the punch that you might think it would pack based on how the colors look and based on the concept. It's like, to me, naked X means that you can expect a watered down version of X because of the formula. And as long as you know that, and you know that that's what you're getting, maybe you won't be disappointed. And maybe there are people who want a watered down version of Metal Mania or like a watered down version of this color story. Again, maybe there are a lot of people who do. And I don't have the market research, but from where I sit, from where I'm positioned, again, as a beauty lover, as a beauty community member, as a YouTuber, as blah, 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 as blah, 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 this just seems like a contradiction in terms. I cannot think of an aesthetic reason, a conceptual reason, a makeup artistry reason why they would go in this direction. And that is why I can only assume that it has something to do with what they know about their customer. So that's like my first reaction to this. But the other thing that I have to say is that it's a shame that they are so hemmed in by whatever is causing them to believe that everything has to be naked X. Because I think fondly of the Born to Run palette. Remember the Urban Decay Born to Run palette? That to me, it was ages ago that was released. And to me, that was like maybe their last great experiment in pouring all of their like brand aesthetic and their passion and their creativity and their ability to be visionary, like pouring it all into something that's not naked, something clothed. And it was so beautiful. I mean, if memory serves, everyone was so hyped up about it. It was so beautiful. It seems to me like the best thing that they've done in years. I don't know how the formula was. I didn't buy it. I never saw it in person. I never tried it, but I still remember it. And they've done so much weird stuff since then. then that I totally can't remember. But I remember the Born to Run palette. It seems like it stands in my mind for what Urban Decay could be evolving into if they would just let go of this albatross, the albatross of nudity that they insist on carrying, probably again because of money, like probably because of sales. But maybe I'm overly optimistic or don't appreciate how much that market research probably matters, but I just would love to see what would happen if they would let it go, push into the Born to Run direction or whatever kind of impulse that came from, like whatever place in their boardroom, executive decision-making, artistic team, like whatever corner of that Born to Run came from. I just wish they would revisit that corner and dwell there for a while and see what could happen to the brand, because maybe they're still selling well worldwide, but I feel like in the beauty community, Urban Decay is like dying and died off, and it's all because of this. Okay, I wavered about whether to include the Prada beauty launch in this video, meaning like I'm only talking about a handful of things. So of all the things that have come out, is it worth it? The thing that pushed me over the edge and made me decide to include it is that my friend Stephanie, who's Beauty Unhyped on Instagram, you should definitely follow her. She's a really great makeup Instagram account. Stephanie bought a couple of pieces from this line and so far has said that it's just really exquisitely executed. Like the packaging. The thing that intrigues me the most is these little eyeshadow quads in which Stephanie says on Instagram, the pans are totally flush with the pan dividers and everything is just like really neat and clean, and even the little brush and the little, I guess, sponge tip applicator, they like fit perfectly into the receptacle so that they don't rattle around. I mean, apparently the execution is just flawless and very, very pleasing. And the colors of I guess they're trios, eyeshadow trios. The colors are, well, no, they're quads because there's like a bar across the top. I mean, they're intriguing. The imagery is really pleasing. And Stephanie has said that the execution is just as pleasing. There's a transparent matte green lip balm. It's that thing where every little touch, every little detail has been considered. It has just the right amount of quirkiness balanced with exquisite execution, exquisite design. Every detail has been thought of. It has been designed within an inch of its life, but in a very tasteful way. And I just love to see that. And that's why I'm including it here. There's another part of me that's like, all of the luxury brands are doing this. Like all of the fashion houses are starting to release makeup. I feel like when it was just Hermes, it was kind of exciting. When it was just Dries Van Noten, it was kind of exciting. I mean, some of the hardcore ones like Chanel makeup, like that's been around for years, but I feel like for years it was just the same couple of fashion houses that also did beauty, and a lot of them didn't do beauty. And then recently, a lot of them are piling on. Like a lot of fashion houses are jumping on that bandwagon. And sort of the cynical side of me that maybe has come from the side of me that sort of developed because of having essentially worked in beauty now for 6 years, that part of me thinks that this is happening because it has become easier and less expensive to produce makeup, because manufacturing has just become easier, and manufacturing fancy things for less is becoming increasingly easier. The fact that all of these luxury brands are starting to launch lines and all these celebrities are starting to launch lines of things, it makes me think that on the back end, like something has changed in terms of the cost benefit analysis of the risk of launching something like this. And thinking about it that way kind of cheapens it for me. You know what I mean? It makes it feel like it's not a passion project at all. And even though whoever actually was hired to do the design has put passion into it, and as someone who loves makeup, it's hard not to be intrigued. You know what I mean? Like I see it and I'm like, especially seeing my friend buy it and be like, yeah, I mean, everything is exquisitely done. It's hard not to be attracted to it. But there's just this little part of me that's like, is it about the makeup itself, like the quality of the makeup itself? Or is it about Prada just seeing an opportunity and taking that opportunity to sort of conceive of what the makeup version of their brand aesthetic overall would be and bring that into existence kind of as an aesthetic exercise, like kind of as an aesthetic project, but without actually really caring about the makeup itself and the performance of it and its destiny in people's lives and how it will help people and how it will feel to people and on their skin. You know what I mean? isn't really like a human element to this. It doesn't feel like there is in the way that a lot of makeup brands these days actually do have. Like you can tell that people care, people making makeup. I feel like even some of the more high-end ones, like especially the ones that have been doing it for a long time, they're invested in the use value of the makeup for people. And some of the slightly newer ones, like I actually feel like Gucci is kind of invested in the use value of the makeup for people and the way that the aesthetic lights up your life, sort of. This just feels a little bit more clinical to me. And the more fashion brands that do this, that kind of follow this path, the more they all feel kind of clinical to me. But maybe someday I'll try it and it'll be spectacular and I'll take it all back. And if that happens, I'll totally let you know. Okay, an interesting, potentially, I didn't plan it this way, potentially an interesting foil to everything I just said about Prada Beauty and about fashion houses. It might surprise you that this is in here, but I feel like this is of note based on how some of my remarks in past and recent new makeup hot takes were received. Here's the announcement. Rhode, Hailey Bieber's skincare line, is coming out with something that it appears can be used as color cosmetics. So it looks like it's a lip and cheek, and there's a red one and a pink one, or maybe they're cream blushes that you can apply on your lips. It's hard to tell because it's like these screenshots of her just playing around with the product. So far, Rhode has only released skincare, and it was that skin milk that I talked about maybe in the last new makeup hot takes, or I think it was the one before actually. And I was a bit disparaging in that video of Rhode. I was kind of like, if I'm going to buy a skincare product like this, I was saying that I was really attracted to the concept of the product that she had just launched. And I was saying, but if I'm going to buy a product like this, I'm going to buy it from a different brand rather than someone who kind of has a lot of irons in the fire, who isn't necessarily all about skincare, but who's like a celebrity and she's just doing skincare on the side. That was sort of like the gist of my hot take on that skincare product and, my hot take on Rhode by extension. And a lot of people in the comments were like, actually, my favorite kind of comment, actually. No, but I appreciate the information in this case. Actually, Rhode is really good. And some of you were like, I only care about ingredients. And so I'm really interested in skincare. And actually, Rhode has really amazing ingredients. And some of you were even like, I'm not sure Hailey Bieber actually has that much going on besides making her skincare line. Like she's just sitting around with this as her main project. And it actually seems like, because I don't know. Like, I don't know from Hailey Bieber. I'm not out here following her. I don't know. I actually don't know. I made a lot of assumptions in my hot take in that video. And some people seem to think that she actually does have a passionate interest in it. And it kind of is putting her all into it and actually developing quite good products. So I sort of sat up and took notice. I was like, well, I'm not going to rush out and buy a bunch of Rhode skincare, but I was like, well, I'll follow her future career with a little more interest than I had been following it before. And at that time, and this is why this is making it into this video, at that time, I read all those comments, I took a step back and I thought to myself, when she releases makeup, like when she starts releasing color cosmetics, then I will really take note. Because as a reviewer up here, that's the thing that really makes it time. That's when it's time to wade into a brand like this and start reviewing, giving feedback, and really taking a committed interest. And lo and behold, a mere month or so later, it's happening. And who knows? It's just interesting to contrast this to the Prada situation, the reaction to Prada. Intentionally, this announcement is so much more lo-fi. It's like this blurry, messy footage of her just applying the product, but that kind of unpolished marketing, like that kind of vulnerability behind the scenes quality, that's what sells these days. Like that's what influencer marketing is. And she totally knows that. And that's what she's doing with this. And it's just interesting for me to see this and be like, oh, it does feel like there's a little more. And this is also based on some of your comments the last time we talked about Rhode. But emotionally, it feels like there's a little bit more authenticity and engagement with the reality of the tactile experience of makeup here than there is in that extremely impressive, beautiful, polished luxury, and again, kind of slightly clinical aesthetic exercise that is the Prada launch. Both theoretically coming from the same place, right? A fashion house and a fashion person with extra money. And they're like, I'm going to use this extra money to make more money by making more stuff and selling it, right? That's both Prada and Hailey Bieber are doing that, but in such different ways. Funnily enough, even though I love beautifully designed luxury stuff, in this case, for me right now in this moment, I'm finding myself a little bit more compelled by Haley over here. The only issue for me is like one's a pink and one's a strawberry red. If those are really the only two colors of this product, that's going to be a hard sell for me, but we'll see. Okay, lastly, I am going to talk about one complexion product. There are a lot of complexion products new to the market that I probably would have talked about had this been a normal new makeup hot takes. But what I would have said about each one of them, I'll tell you what it would have been. Interesting for XYZ reason, and clearly the lightest shades are super saturated with pigment. There's nothing even close to an olive, a neutral, anything tinged with gray, anything desaturated in any of the concealer foundation lines that have been announced. And there have just been a couple. If you go to Scrundmood. If you go to Trendmood and you scroll, that's why I was about to say Scrundmood, because it was scroll. If you go to Scroll Mood and you trend down the page, you'll see what I'm talking about, right? And if you look at the swatches, you'll see that there isn't much pale neutrality being dealt. And this launch that I am going to discuss is actually not really, I don't think, an exception based on what I can see, but I have to talk about it because it's Glossier. And I've reviewed so much Glossier makeup over the years. It's also interesting because I genuinely think the stretch concealer is one of the greatest contributions, if not the greatest contribution that Glossier has made to the world of makeup. And until now, that's been their only real complexion product. I mean, they had the skin tint, but it was very, very tinty, like non-existently tinty. And it's taken a long time for them to take this step, which is releasing a foundation. What's it going to be like? They're calling it the Stretch Fluid Foundation. And of course they're doing that because they know how popular the stretch concealer is. And they're hoping that people will get it because they're like, oh, if it's called the Stretch Fluid Foundation, then it's probably just as good as the Stretch Fluid Concealer. But it's just a different product with the same naming. There's nothing to guarantee that it's going to be as good as the Stretch Concealer because they're two different products, two different formulas. Let's not fall for that old trick. However, it just makes it intriguing, right? Everything about this is interesting. It definitely is at the top of the list in terms of intrigue of all of the things that have been released. Apparently also, they've expanded the range of the concealer. I need to take a look at it. Oh no, not the concealer, the Stretch Balm Concealer? I didn't know that they'd come out with a different kind of concealer. Oh no, it's the same concealer you know and love, now available in 32 foundation matching shades. They've just given it a new name. This is a fantastic product, the Glossier Stretch Concealer, but even in the newly expanded range, which it looks like they've expanded to match the shade range of the foundation. They have totally missed the memo on desaturation, right? They've got these very pale shades. I mean, the lightest shade is looking delightfully pale, like really, really inclusively pale in terms of lightness, or like going light enough to include everybody. But those light shades, they just look very saturated with yellow and peach pigment. The same is true of the foundation, and the foundation bottle, you can really see it in the pictures of the bottles, right? On the models, none of them seem to have desaturated skin at all, and they look great. They look lovely. Like the skin looks quite natural, but even. But the pictures of the bottles of those lightest 5 or 6 shades, they all look totally orange, right? They just look like different shades of peach. And again, this is the same complaint that I always have. And this is the same complaint I would have had about, or not necessarily complaint, it's just an observation. Like, it just is what it is. This is where we're at this moment in makeup history, and at this moment in the evolution of like brands trying to provide good shade matches for people. We've got these relatively expansive shade ranges relative to how they used to be, many of which are really quite inclusive in terms of value. Like the darkest is quite dark and the lightest is quite light, but none of which are inclusive in terms of saturation. They're all like really saturated. It's just how it is. And this Glossy Lunch is no exception. So these are the things I wanted to say about it. Just because it's called a stretch foundation doesn't mean that it's going to be a hit, right? It's not necessarily the same in any way as the Balm Concealer. It could be. They have a good track record with this type of thing, clearly. But I just wanted to point out that that's just a marketing move. The second thing I want to talk about is the shade range. And the third thing is a good thing. I appreciate these super untouched photos. I appreciate that in the imagery on the website showing the different shades that I've been looking through, it's real people with real skin and real like creases and wrinkles, and you can actually kind of see product on the skin a little bit, but in the way that all makeup shows up on skin. You know what I mean? Like most all makeup looks like makeup on skin when it's up close and it's untouched. the photos, and they've allowed that to be what they're showing in the pictures. And I think that that gives a much more realistic sense of what you're actually buying. And I quite appreciate that. I think that it's cool that Glossier is doing that. And there's also more age diversity than there used to be and more gender diversity than there used to be in the imagery and in the models that they've chosen. Just in investigating this product and trying to figure out what it's all about, checking out the shade range, etc., I came across this aspect of the Glossier marketing that I really appreciate, and I wanted to at least throw them a bone for that because, as you can tell, I'm a little bit skeptical, but I can't wait to see how this is received. I'm really curious to know whether this will be a smash hit or a huge miss, because in my experience, that's what it usually is for Glossier. Very hit and miss, and the hits are big hits and the misses are big misses. So I will definitely be following their career with some interest. And that is it. I think I managed to do it. I think I managed to film a fully full length, like a usual length, and hopefully genuinely juicy new makeup hot takes that won't require Joe to screenshot and input like 150 images. I hope that I have pulled it off. I hope we'll get it edited in time. And if all of that has happened, I really hope that you enjoyed it. And I hope that you'll consider subscribing if you aren't subscribed. But no matter what, I hope that you're taking extra good care of yourself so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world. Okay, I did it, and I didn't go into labor.